Welcome back to Just Another Solar Podcast with Luke Beattie. That's me, and Carl Jensen. G'day, Carl.
Luke, good afternoon, good evening. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks, mate. You missed the last episode, the 1 year anniversary.
I know, right? Outrageous, but we're making up with it for it this week, and we've got two amazing guests.
So we'll jump into that shortly. And there's a very interesting topic and relevant one. Just wanted to acknowledge at the moment, people are being affected by the floods and just due to the weather, struggling to get panels on roofs and all sorts of stuff. So we're thinking of you guys. We hope to see a lot of you at All Energy next week. One other very interesting point, the exchange rate has dropped. We're down to 62, 63. And as a basic guide for the panels, as it drops proportionally, the panels go up.
Yeah, so this is why we started the podcast in the first place, save us having to have the same conversation with customers day in, day out. So if any solar business isn't paying attention to the exchange rate at the moment, well, you should be. Of course, the best way to hedge a falling dollar is to buy stock and put it in your warehouse.
And one other quick note I want to make before I introduce these guys. I noticed that Rene Solar's back in the market, CEC listed. Rene Solar abandoned the country and megawatts worth of warranty liabilities with products that were failing. And I just find it curious that they end up back on the CEC list. So I hope that there's someone who's going to revise that, because it doesn't seem right that a company can have all these failing products, abandon their warranties, disappear and come back bright and new and reappear on those lists.
In 2016, they were the largest manufacturer in Australia. So more people bought Rene than any other panel.
It's either warrant the ones that are still under warranty and the historic ones, or it's very hard to say that they should be welcome. All right, we better jump in with our guests. Now, this is a very, very relevant topic for solar people. We've gone from solar to batteries, and now we're going to EV chargers. So a lot of solar companies are taking this on, and electricians around the country, and with the forecast uptake of EVs, it's going to be critical infrastructure. So thought it was really important to jump in, get a couple of specialists who know a lot about EV charging and all of the challenges around it. So the first one today is Shane Arnold from Fronius Australia. Shane has been on the program before. G'day, Shane.
Hey, Luke. Thanks for having me again.
And how's it all looking for the build-up to All Energy? You got a lot going on.
Well, heaps. I'm, as you know, I was a little late to this meeting. I apologise for that, but it's just been hectic. I head to Melbourne tomorrow. There's a big week and a half worth of activities with Fronius and All Energy, awards nights, etc. Cutters events. It's big. So I'm getting my rest in now.
And by the time this gets edited and gets released, we'll be in All Energy Week, I'm guessing. And the other guest is someone Carl and I know from years back, and he was for over 10 years. He was with Infinite Energy and was a general manager of their commercial department, Steve Richards, who's now at Bright Connect. G'day, Steve. Welcome to the program.
Guys, how are you? Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, just looking at what you guys do, so you supply electricity, broadband, and other crucial solutions to apartments and commercial complexes. Do you want to give a quick brief about what you guys do?
Yeah, Bright Connect's a specialist community energy and I guess other services that sort of relate to that for where we would have aggregated consumers, so the apartment complexes, shopping centre, office block, and so on. So we will come in and operate the embedded network and really optimize its efficiency to be able to provide the value to the occupants and users within those networks. Electricity is an obvious one, and we've got the broadband. There's water, hot water, cold water, and now EVs as well is becoming a really interesting topic, particularly for developers who have to have a longer term view on what they're with their buildings, given the life cycle of a building and where EVs will be in 5, 10, 15 years from now.
So the building code just changed there, Steve. Every car parking space has to have access to power for a Type 2 charger at 7 kilowatts.
Oh, I mean, look, that's a real challenge for a developer because there's so many considerations that go into that beyond just putting in the infrastructure itself, which Shane can obviously talk a lot more to. We look at it very much as how would you operate that, because the way that EV charging and other infrastructure operates within an embedded network can have a significant impact on the cost to operating or the cost of electricity for that building.
So, Steve, for people that aren't familiar with this, you've got a background in commercial energy sales. So the straight up thing that comes to mind for me is the maximum demand charge, in particularly in WA. So fill people in on how that actually works. How do they calculate that?
Yeah, there's a couple of elements to the energy market, and WA is a different market to the rest of the country. So we primarily focus in WA and sort of optimize for that. But conceptually, the operations of it can apply to any market. You just change the way you operate. But yeah, as you say, max demand is a really big component, and there's sort of two elements to the max demand. You've got your physical max demand, so a building's capacity to supply a certain amount of power. That needs to be managed, otherwise it'll trip and black out and so on. The other component is obviously the financial element, and if you consume a lot of power at any one point in time, and it might only be a half-hour interval, you will end up paying significantly more. You can add 20-30% to the cost of your energy bill for that whole building as a result of a very small period of time where you use a lot of energy. That's a key piece to operating an EV portfolio, if you will, or within an apartment complex, say, is to ensure that you're not triggering those financial implications, because at some point, and it might not be immediately, that building will then experience an increase in the bill as a result of that. And it might be 6 months, might be 12 months down the track, but it'll inevitably come, as the retailers will reprice it based on the future risk of that happening again.
Just touching on that max demand issue, Shane, do you have anything to add there about some of the problems it brings up and potential solutions?
Yeah, I think, there's obviously commercial and residential to consider, and commercial can be the bakery with 2 chargers out the front, or a workplace with 15 chargers sitting out the front. As Steve was saying, protecting that breaker from tripping and cutting power, it is a big question that's happening, and even for residential now. So, the load control, as we call it, the EV charger has to be the sacrificial lamb on these premises, because air conditioning is not going to be sacrificed on a hot day, and nor is the oven going to turn off just so you can keep the car charged. So having infrastructure and peripherals to control and ensure that life goes on happily ever after, and EVs don't become a burden, that's going to be a big part of focus for any EV charger operator, manufacturer and user. So it's a big focus for a lot of people.
Steve, you mentioned that you're solution agnostic, so you're not brand aligned. With Shane, he's with Fronius Australia, and they have the Watt Pilot that's coming to market and has applications, residential and commercial. But in our discussions, I got the impression that there's not really a standardised solution yet, or a silver bullet solution for apartments and commercial yet.
Yeah, in the sense of operating it, we find that it's probably not so much that it's not there. It's probably there's just a lack of awareness of the implications. The technology is quite smart. And as Shane said, you've got load management and all of those things. So those functions are critical to operating within, like a community network. If you don't have those functions, which for us is critical, you have an uncontrolled electricity consumption component, which from an operating a network perspective becomes extremely risky, and that's where you have the inefficiencies then that occur in a network, and therefore cost changes and cost to customers and so on. So we don't have a technology or a brand or anything like that we particularly align to. We have functionality that we align to. So it needs to do certain things for us to be able to then efficiently integrate it into a network, to then be able to operate it ongoing, to ensure A, people are getting the outcome that they want, but B, it's not causing any physical issues at the site or financial issues. And that's really the key piece that we look at from a sort of technology perspective.
So, Steve, are we talking the difference between 20 cents a kilowatt hour and 40 cents a kilowatt hour? If we get this wrong, what's the magnitude of this issue?
For an apartment complex, when we aggregate all the consumers, we turn that site into a contestable, large commercial site, for lack of a better term. The cost implications for getting it wrong, I guess from our perspective, where we see the cost for the whole site, would easily be in the realms of 20 or 30%. If you were to get it really wrong, you're talking 40 or 50% increases, because it increases fixed components. The energy component in its own right is not that expensive or critical. It's really these fixed costs that only need to occur very rarely to have significant impact on the cost of that whole building. And you can only then pass those costs on. I guess would apply on a residential setting, but it's not seen on a bill because Synergy sort of backstop that cost and wear that as the only supplier in WA, and that's where the markets are a little bit different. But in our scenario, and probably in the East Coast, which if you've got I guess non-standard tariffs, and I don't know that market as well. If you're exposed to your maximum demand costs, then having EV chargers not operating at the right time, you'll get whacked with probably 20, 30% increases as a result of that.
Well, there's definitely a movement towards time of use tariffs.
Yeah.
So it's the same principle anyway, that if you're charging during peak times, it's going to cost more. So even if you're not in an embedded network, you're still going to be penalised if you're trying to pull.
Even that, Luke, that there's not enough resolution in the time of use tariff. So if I look at Amber or even the cost on the NEM, right now I can see that the NEM cost is 18 cents a kilowatt hour, and there's only 18% renewables on the East Coast grid. 18 cents a kilowatt hour is pretty close to the off-peak rate, and it's only 7.30 here in Melbourne. So we'd be paying peak rate power, which is 40 cents. So all good, people making money. But I see other occasions on the grid where it's 120 cents a kilowatt hour and it's off-peak time. And you go, well, hang on, something's gone seriously wrong here, because people are paying 20 cents for a kilowatt hour and someone has to pay $1.20 at the other end. So there isn't enough resolution just in the peak and off-peak tariffs. They're not dynamic. They're not actually following the market price. And that's what Steve's saying.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. We effectively have direct access to the wholesale market. So the energy price at a wholesale level is a component that can enable us to indirectly engage with our customers to sort of drive beneficial behavioral changes. So EV charging is an easy example where you could say, okay, well, we'll give you a specific, or we'll give the building, for example, a specific EV charging rate between 2 a.m., 5 a.m., or whatever the number is, and lots of different scenarios can play out. But you can take what the market actually requires, and really the pricing signals are a driver of what the market requires, and you're using those pricing signals to shift load to other times where there's excess generation capacity, and therefore the market's telling you we want you to consume at certain times and not at certain times. So we really then plug into that and go, okay, well, let's optimize the way that the network operates to reflect the most efficient way to operate it. However, consumers at an end level are not interested in that. Then it's probably too complex, and it's just not something that people get involved in. So you can indirectly achieve that outcome by creating specific pricing signals for your energy tariffs and so on, or specific EV tariffs and so on.
Throwing this over to Shane, what technology exists in the charger space in order for you to give that charger the signal to say, all right, go for it, hammer it. We want to use that grunt, because if we're just telling people, you're not going to ring your customers and say, hey, dude, I need you to turn on your EV charger as fast as you can.
It's a good question, because habit, trying to change habit is very hard, but if it's automated or there's smarts in the technology, that's going to be a much more likely solution.
Ask any solar installer in South Australia and Western Australia if they can make it easy enough to turn your inverters off and down. I'm sure they could tell you how to turn your EV chargers on and ramp them up and down as well.
Yeah. So
the communication that we use on EV chargers, we would be familiar with Modbus in inverters, but in chargers we have OCPP, Open Charge Point PowerPoint or something. Charge Point Operator. Anyway, another acronym I can't be bothered remembering. But the idea is that they can send, we can go real basic, okay? So if we've got a plan with our energy retailer, we can set in that EV charger what times we can charge at and what rate, plug the car in. It's pretty hard set. That's what we're going to do. You can program it in very simply through a web portal or an app. The likes of Carl picked up the phone there and looked at the amber rates. We could receive commands to charge our vehicles from amber. There could be events if they need to stop our charging, we can do that. And that can be aggregated or it could be individual. All that technology is available and obviously being spearheaded through the energy markets of Europe, which it's a big part of that. A lot of, in the solar market, we got a lot of pushback. I don't want you controlling my inverter. I don't want you turning it off. The Electric Vehicle Council only just this month released quite an interesting survey. And when they asked their participants, how likely would you be to allow someone to control your charger, 23% were very likely, 21% likely. The unlikely and very unlikely were 12 and 26% respectively. But other surveys have said that EV owners would be cool for their chargers to be controlled, which is a really good culture to start seeing there. And I think it comes with the demographic of electric vehicle owners as well, in that they're sitting there thinking, well, if I'm going to let someone control my charger, what's in it for me? Is there bonuses? Is there savings? And it could be simply just there's a detrimental effect if you keep charging right now and it's going to cost you hard. We need to stop it, or we're going to charge your car now. Who knows? Might get paid for it. I don't know. But I'm waiting for
that, Shane, when it says the rate on the grid is negative 15 cents. I want to push the throttles to the wall and have that EV charger, have that car actually paying me money to charge. Steve, when's that going to happen, mate?
I know, right? I mean, it's all the elements are there, but you're exactly right, because you're then turning an EV into a mobile battery that can be further used to create efficiencies in the market, and everyone shares in that. And as an owner, you'll get the lion's share of having effectively a mobile battery that you're enabling to support the grid in whatever function that is. So it's something that I'm sure lots of people are talking about, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
Speaking of which, you're there yet. You're getting around in the ultimate mode of transport, right? So the typical Australian dream, we've got a V8 four-wheel drive. Realistically, what does that thing use? Are we talking 20 litres per 100 k's for that bad boy?
I don't think it's quite that much, but probably not far off.
Not far off. So we're talking realistically with petrol at $2 a litre, we're talking $40 per 100 k's to run that thing. And yet there's people getting around in Tesla Model 3s that are doing 140 watt hours a kilometre. So we're talking 14 kilowatt hours at, say, off-peak rates of 20 cents. So we're talking $2.80 versus your $40. So it has to happen, right? This is an absolute no-brainer that people are going to adopt EVs as soon as they realise that we're talking at least 10 times less the cost, if not 20 times less the cost.
Now, Shane, coming back to the solutions, you're talking about a Grid One, and there's a few solutions out there that guys are using that are responsive to PV. So you have one of them. I mean, you could speak on lots of them, but you work for Fronius, so it makes sense to outline what the Pilot does it may apply to some other solutions too, but it'd be good to understand.
I'll speak to all of them. I mean, clearly we do it better, if I could be so sly as to say, but
no, you can give a plug, but I'm more interested in hearing about the
shameless.
Yeah. Let's put it this way: if you're not making electricity, you're paying for it, right? So if I'm making electricity and I've got more than I need, where do we want it to go? We want it to go into my car and not an electron more from the grid to go into the car at the same time. The more green electrons we get in there, the better it is for the wallet, environment, and everyone else. So, we've got the Watt Pilot there. It's just being released. And what a lot of people don't understand is the starting charge rate of a vehicle can actually be quite high, and it can actually be quite low. So a Tesla Model 3, I think, starts charging at 8 amps to single phase, which is 1.8 kilowatts or something like that. But a Renault Zoe starts at 10 kilowatts to get going. So the technology could happen that you go, yes, I'm going to charge my car with solar soak, I'm going to plug it in. But what happens if I'm not exporting enough electricity to charge the car at night or in the next morning or whatever I get in the car? There's no charge in there. So and Steve sort of hit the nail on the head, there's a lot of variables to have here. So what we've got all these cars preset in the system. You can choose it. It's a very good bunch of settings to suit your particular car. And you might turn around and say, look, yes, I've got to start charging at 1.8 kilowatts, but I'm cool with you charging if I'm exporting 500 watts and just pull the rest from the grid or the battery if I've got it. And as more sun comes up, there'll be less from the grid. And that's about getting as much electricity in the car efficiently to suit what you want. You might come home and you're going out for dinner. You want to plug it in. You want to hit the black button a few times and get, 16 amps, 11 kilowatts into this thing. Let's go. So flexibility and ease of flexibility is really important. It's the Watt Pilot. It can work on third-party inverters. We've got accessories that allow that to happen. But I think something that is going to be important for people going long distances, and Carl knows this, with not having enough charge to get home, is we can all take a portable charger, but they're limited to how much the rate of charge they can go at. So that's something that this product brought out, that we can, the portable model can charge at 32 amps, 3-phase if you want. So we've got this big flexible beast that can go with you from house or whatever. It can connect up to your friends. I go around Carl's place with a Watt Pilot Go. He's got his inverters connect up and I can charge from his excess solar.
Just break out the screwdriver and get stuck into the board. So I don't have anywhere you can plug in at the moment. But I'll make an exception for you, Shane. I'll break out the side cutters and we'll do some guerrilla electrical work to hotwire the car. Sounds like a great plan.
This is a good point. You could be a specialised EV charger installer and effectively you just have to drop a GPO in the garage.
Look,
mount a bracket on the wall.
I really do like the concept of the Watt Pilot Go that's got a plug on it, simply because it's unlikely that we're going to not have an electric car going forward. However, the average lifespan of people in their homes is only 7 years before they change up, change down, change sideways, whatever. So just to be able to unplug that thing, chuck it in the back of the car and take it with you when it's typically at least a $750 or $1,000, what's more than $1,000 investment for a smart charger. So to be able to take it with you, I think is a great feature that currently no one else has come up with. And certainly there's lots of EV chargers on the market that simply aren't robust enough to be portable. If you're not screwing it to the wall, it's definitely going to get damaged if you chuck it in the boot.
And you know what, Carl? Something that's kind of surprised us is, we built this with people like you in mind, and myself and Luke and Steve, that you're going to have an electric car at home, you're going to plug it in. But interestingly enough, the commercial operators are very interested in it. So we've got all these electric cars coming online. Dealerships are getting them off the ship at X percentage, 10, 15, 20%. They need to charge them up. Now they've got a couple of options, and traditionally it's let's get a DC charger on the site. Let's slam that charge into it at 125 kilowatts, one car at a time. A lot of risk with that one charger. And a lot of these dealerships and pre-deliveries, they just do not have the power supply in some of these places to do that. So, we're talking about energy rates, portable charger, plug into the wall, plug the cars in overnight. That pre-delivery floor becomes a charging station. In the morning, they're all unplugged and cars are pre-delivered, wheeled in, wheeled out. And at night, the apprentices are plugging cars back in and pulling, whatever amperage. They don't even have to pull the full 32 amps, 16 amps or whatever to get there.
I can see Steve in the background rubbing his hands together.
Yeah.
Let's just plug all of these cars in overnight.
Steve's like, that sounds like money to me.
So this is exactly what Steve was saying before. So Steve's trying to manage the demand, manage the market. So when Steve sees the wind blowing, he wants to ramp up the charger. And when the dealer gets these deliveries of cars, he needs to deliver them tomorrow morning. He doesn't care. So Steve's going to make some money.
You make me sound so money hungry, Carl.
Look, at the end of the day, we all have to put food on the table, and if there's more cables and wires that are involved in the needs of what are the changing needs of the grid going forward, then that's what happens. And the reason why those demand charges are there is so that the likes of Western Power and the network operators can pay for the upgrades to the grid that needs to deliver those kilowatt hours. I don't think it's an evil thing at all. I think it's a good thing that there's strategies in place to fund the infrastructure that we need going forward.
I agree 100%. The issue, not the issue, one of the things is that if you're operating the network inefficiently, you're upgrading components that didn't necessarily need to be upgraded that could have been done a different way. And I think, this is where Shane's with talking with the technology and things like that, is that the technology is there. The disconnect that we sort of see in the market, certainly in our space, is the consideration ongoing. Most people just think you plug it in and away you go and that's it. And in an apartment complex with say 1, 2, 3, 4 chargers, it's not a big deal. But if you look 5 years from now and there's 40 or 50 and you aggregate 50 chargers at one time, that's a lot of energy. It's not an efficient way to then turn around and upgrade the building's energy to supply that. Like it just doesn't make sense. There's better ways to do it.
I'll chuck it in there. So there's a lot of talk in various community forums about how this is going to break the grid and so on and so forth. The average punter only does 12,000 Ks a year. If we math it out, 40 Ks a day when we're using 1.4 kilowatt hours to do 10 Ks. So we're only talking about 5 or 6 kilowatt hours to feed said car. We're not talking about 50 or 60 on a daily basis. It's not as ugly as it could be potentially painted by the anti-EV crowd. So anti-EV crowd says you need 100 kilowatt hours every day, whereas the reality is you need 5.
But I suppose the infrastructure needs to account for the event where you do get everyone needing a heap of charge as well.
Yeah, but you can distribute the operations of that to not need that full amount. Like you're never going to be in a scenario where it needs everyone all at the same time as much as possible. That's kind of like saying, well, Western Power or someone should build a grid for everyone having their oven, their kettle, their TV, their air conditioning, and everything all running at the same time. Like there's a sort of a diversity factor that needs to be applied in reality, and that's sort of that I guess that's how we see it is to set your the building up to be able to operate as efficiently as possible in the energy market going forward. Yeah, and that's, in our view anyway, the smarter way to do it, rather than spending money upgrading substations and poles and wires and things like that unnecessarily.
Interestingly, I'm part of a trial, Steve, that's smart EV charging. So it takes the API data that the inverters are spitting out, in my case, a couple of SIMO 10s, and it then gives the car commands over API to ramp up and down to match that solar generation. And they reckon that with the data they've got, with over 1,000 users, basically it solves this problem that solar's been imposing on the grid in terms of the duck curve. We've got this massive amount of generation in the day. And even at the moment, I've got an export limit of 15 kilowatts, but I've got 20 kilowatts worth of inverter capacity. So I'm telling I'm telling this app to not start charging the car until I've got 15 kilowatts available, and then it's solving my export limit problem and using that energy that otherwise I wouldn't be harvesting at all. But in winter, obviously, I need to track it down to next to nothing in order to be able to get enough grunt out of it. But the fact that it's flexible enough and smart enough, they're talking about now, even with off-peak stuff, if every Tom, Dick and Harry turns their EV charger on at 9:01 to take advantage of off-peak tariffs, we've got a problem. So apps like that have the ability to automatically stage the implementation of other people coming on and dropping off, so that instead of everybody hitting it at 9 o'clock, now Carl misses out this week. He's not going to get turned on till 10:45. But at the end of the day, I wake up in the morning, my car's still got plenty of juice. I'm happy.
Yeah, and that conceptually, that's the same concept that we apply at an apartment complex. I mean, we have less solar as a percentage of the energy that's sort of flowing around, if you will, an apartment complex. Obviously, a lot more users, a lot higher, and much smaller roof space. So, we have to view the grid and what's going on there probably a little bit closer. But conceptually, it's the same thing. You're effectively trying to operate it as efficiently as possible. We do that at an apartment level based on all of our input data, which can be, what solar's going on at any one time. If there's any other batteries available within the building, if you've got any discretionary electric loads, electric hot water, centralized hot water, for example. And then obviously whatever's going on with grid pricing, you take all those variables and then your discretionary EV load and go, okay, how do we operate this with all of those components to have the most efficient outcome? And that's really the function that we play, and sort of goes back to the technology for us is less about the brand or whatever. It's about the functionality. And scenarios like you describe is what the grid needs to be able to integrate this and actually become a good thing for the grid, not this negative, it's going to destroy the grid sort of narrative that occurs.
And are we going to see community sharing as well? So you might have some of the apartment users have solar in their workplace. They're charging from solar. They don't require a full charge to get to work in the morning. And then, assuming we can get chargers and inverters that are going to be able to share it in a way of actually metering that, which I think the technology is almost there. If not there, it's just not being applied. Then we can see a scenario where it's not just dependent on the grid or the solar. You get home at night and you've got so many users that can share their charge and somehow account for that, incentivize it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the communal ones are there already. We're installing communal ones that developers want access to, sort of, I guess, if you consider a car park in an apartment complex outside the gate for the car, for the residents. You can have potentially go beyond just the apartment complex and make it a public one. And that infrastructure exists today. There's shared, fob on access or account setups. You can go, there's many different paths you can go with that. But I mean, that's a shared in a traditional sense. We could, in theory, have people sharing car bay charges. Apartment one says to the group of the, users occupants within the building, I'm out every day between 9 and 5. Anyone that's not, shift work or whatever, feel free to charge it. And we can then account for those charging periods on the other apartment's bill. So we single bill for the energy use, and we make sure that the user of whatever charger is responsible for their costs on their bill. So we could have a scenario where an apartment complex could start sharing one resident or several residents' individual charges, and then we can account for that financially on different invoices.
Back in Infinite Energy days, you had a wall with at least 10 monitors, and you could see what 10 sites were doing specifically. And I've got this vision right now of Steve sitting in front of a mixing desk in front of Tomorrowland with 100,000 people. and you sliding up and down the levels on this mixing desk. How is an energy retailer like yourself actually giving these commands to people that have got this software? You know, how does that happen?
This is part of the challenge, because you're then dealing with individual platforms that technology is integrated. So, you know, if it's Fronius, for example, we're logging into the Fronius and we're managing the Fronius. And if we had another battery that wasn't Fronius, you know, we might have to log into that and do that. And so you can API across them. And so it forces us to create sort of like this our own sort of centralized aggregator of data to be able to then connect and create and distribute commands and so on. I mean, the meter data as the core function is very easy. I mean, meters have been around forever. We send that in. Similar to, you know, what Western Power and all the guys over east would do. So when we've got EV charges, we're just getting another feed of data, for example, to say, okay, well, this is how many units and applied to this bill and so on. I mean, it's not seamless in the sense that there's operational management that's required to make all these things work. So it's not easy in the sense that you don't just push one button and things happen. But with where the technology's at generally, it's starting to move to a point where we can write commands sort of like, you know, if pricing goes here, do this and so on. Yeah, and that's an evolving piece, because the market's always changing, technology's always changing, and I don't think it's ever something we'll get to a final point where we can just sit back and do nothing. But it's effectively an API connections with everything that allows us to at least look at the data and then make decisions. And sometimes it happens, and sometimes we have to go and log and do things.
It's just awesome that we're having this conversation, Steve, because you and I went to Intersolar on the back of Fronius perhaps 7, maybe 8 years ago, and we were just a couple of sales dudes.
We were. I'm only marginally doing more than sales at the moment.
Now, it just raises a question for Shane as well. So, Carl, you've mentioned the trial that you're part of, and Steve, you're collating all this information and building systems to manage that. Shane, there's third parties already. There's Charge HQ and some others that are third parties that are doing it. How far can manufacturers get in terms of managing a lot of that stuff without the requirement for third parties?
Doing it, so we can manage their the solar soak and the loads, and you know, just using that OCPP, we can integrate with anyone that really wants to integrate with us. And you know, it takes me a little further here to sort of talk of the fantasy football. What does the future sort of hold? And you know, it may not go this way, but expand that apartment building that we were just talking about and call it the Swiss Southwest. You know, our energy market here. And I go around your place, Luke, and I plug into your charger and I charge my car, and it's not billed to your electricity bill. I get billed for the electricity, but you get a clip for letting me use it. So, you know, my electricity rate, 30 cents, but I may pay 40 cents a kilowatt hour and you get 8 cents a kilowatt hour credited to your bill. So I see that sort of stuff, the integration and ability of a charger to be able to do that, highly, highly important, because the only way we're going to resolve these, you know, naysayers about, there's not enough chargers, is every PowerPoint's a charger, every EV charger, make it accessible and available. And we'll see more and more electric vehicles hitting the road, which is better for everyone. And we can all go around Carl's place and charge off his solar plant over there and give him some coin for it. So in regards to third parties, you know, anything with an API, which we do have with Wattpilot, is kind of open to partnership and integration on those fronts. And
similar to what we've seen with solar inverters, I suppose. We've seen that with solar analytics, Evergen, number of others switched in.
You'll give a bit of credit to the one guy who the biggest PV Output's biggest fan, John Inglis, right? So PV Output was the first to grab APIs, and it's a wonderful website. It's great. So that's where it sort of started. And all it was pulling data where we can sort of exchange some information now. So if, you know, Carl mentioned that the program controls the car's rate of charge, well, it's only integrated with Tesla because they open it up. So EV chargers might need to get, you know, the solar export data from XYZ brand of inverter. pop up to the cloud and go, hey, I've got 3,200 watts to spare, and it will send a command back down to that EV charger and say, charge at 3,200 watts. But that brings into a whole new world of a couple of risk factors there. One, you've got to have an internet connection for it to work. Two, the latency of that internet connection. And three, the refresh rate of the product delivering the data. So it all works in theory, and I think you'll be splitting hairs on this one, but if you sit there, got 3,200 watts to spare, a little cloud pops across and drops down, but you're still motoring along, charging at 3,200 watts, but you're only generating 600 watts. So you're now buying electricity. So you just got to be mindful of that refresh rate of the rate of charge is really, really important in that area, because you could be going along using that spare 3,200 watts. That cloud comes along, all of a sudden you're pulling sort of 2,800 watts out of the grid, and you don't have it, and you haven't got that load control happening. It could get quite complicated. But I'm all for those programs. I think they're great. It gets EV charger users used to external control, which I think is a great culture to embed into the charge network.
So I was just going to step a little bit sideways here and ask Shane's opinion. So there was an announcement today in the CEC member newsletter that said that there's a 1.7 gigawatt hour, 850 megawatt battery going in just out of Brisbane. Lots and lots of talk online about how this isn't worth it, we don't need it, we'd be better off building nuclear and so on. Shane, you've done this to death in terms of batteries, and your knowledge is insanely deep. What's your opinion? How is this going to help our industry, and how is this helping the grid going forward? Batteries of this size being approved to put on the grid.
I think the misconception that people have with these big batteries is the detractors from it will say, I've done the math and it's only going to keep the grid afloat for X amount of minutes. And they kind of miss the point that we've got a rickety, unstable grid. And, anyone can correct me if they want, but my understanding is that, frequency and voltage, this is what it's all about. They sustain a very stable grid. We've got a lot of solar coming in, and a lot of these homeowners, they want their feed-in tariffs and they want the solar going in there, but they're neglecting to understand that with all that solar input into the grids, it needs to go somewhere, and that means we can ramp down a generator, but that's probably not the best way to go. So this buffer of a battery is highly valuable. Carl, still in South Australia, people talk about the useless Tesla battery. And my answer to that quite simply is, so turn it off. If it's so useless, turn it off and let's see how you go without it. It's that simple. Nuclear, sure. How long do we have to wait for that to come online and get built? Anyone will get online and read an article and say, oh, these new reactors and these nuclear power plants, they're really quick. Are they? Where's it happening? What's going on? It's quite clear that in Australia, we're highly motivated towards renewables. Batteries are a big part of that to bring renewables online. The sort of thing we're talking about here is so we've got pumped hydro in the background as well, or we're spending billions of dollars on pumped hydro. But pumped hydro takes a while to turn the tap off, stop that turbine, turn it from a turbine into a pump, and pump it back up. And that's where I need this battery capacity to solve that issue. Yeah, and swift reaction times is pretty important. Yeah, so spinning up and spinning down, it's just we really don't have time for that. The reaction speed of the battery is really, really important.
And that's a benefit of the inverter technology that's basically been developed for solar inverters, yeah?
Yeah, so, your remote, for all those standards that are coming in, to support the frequency, I forgot what the standard is, but it's needed. We become a supporter of the grid rather than a burden.
There's not much time for anything more. I mean, we could continue this conversation. I think it's something we can revisit. Obviously, there's more to unpack, but for the sake of time, we're going to have to wrap it up shortly.
Can I just say one thing? As a lot of solar people are in this, advice can be taken or not. Can I just suggest that with EV charging, any solar company would do very well to announce that they can now supply electric vehicle chargers. They'll do even if they don't want to get right into it and start focusing on it, do yourself a favor, put it on your website, have it as a tab and an option. What have you got to lose? Put it on there and you can say that you've been selling EV chargers since, October 2022, because it's really feeling like solar 2010 when it really just started to pick up. A little bit nervous to see what kind of products come on the market. Hopefully it's not like 2010, Luke and Carl, we've all been through.
Well, you can see there's a gravitation for some people towards a cheaper solution, and they're already mimicking what they're doing in solar. Whereas there's more sophisticated solutions, there is a price difference between a Watt Pilot or, a Delta charger or some of the other chargers out there and some of the cheaper ones. So are we seeing that? We could be.
And we could dismiss it as well a little bit, because when your solar inverter doesn't operate, it's going to take a week or so to get it back online, Mr. Homeowner. You can't tell someone with an electric vehicle that it's going to take them a week or 2 weeks or whatever it will take, maybe 3 months for some manufacturers before they can charge their car at home again. That won't go down well.
Park at the local sports club and walk home.
Come down to our apartments.
So Steve, some of the getting back into the EV thing in terms of people's choices, there's some really awesome EVs starting to hit the market now, particularly from the big boys that we haven't seen or have been, lying dormant. BMW's got a pile of EVs. Mercedes has got a pile of EVs, particularly in the SUV category. I think that those are great avenues for those manufacturers to get in the game. They're always expensive cars to start with, and the EV versions are absolutely awesome.
Yeah, they look pretty cool. They're looking less trying to be like an EV, if that makes sense. Some of the early days you could see and you could spot an EV because it was designed like an EV. Where now these look like what traditionally people would like to see, or what traditionally a car would look like, I guess. I remember, was it the Holden Volt? Yeah, shout out to the Holden Volt, but it was very EV looking. Tesla, I think, changed the game a bit there from a design perspective, which it needed.
Yeah, well, funny thing, Eddie was featured on a number of EV forums this week with his EQC Mercedes, Eddie May from NRG. Yeah. Big shout out to Eddie. He basically said, people say to him, but your car's fueled from coal power, and he's done a TikTok with his PV system feeding his car. So it can be done.
Right, gents. Well, that's all we've got time for today. So thanks, Steve Richards from Bright Connect, for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate the time.
And Shane Arnold from Fronius.
Always a pleasure. It's a good chat. I love the EV conversation. Talk the leg off a chair. So thanks for inviting me.
And make sure, if you want to discuss this further, you can grab hold of Shane around All Energy next week. And I'm sure I'd be happy to continue the conversation. All right. Thanks for listening. Look forward to catching up with you at All Energy. And please share this round, share, like it, and have a good one.